Hello and welcome to the Hoop Collective podcast. We talk about the NBA, which we're doing after midnight on Monday morning. Joining us from New York City, where he attended the 76ers victory over the Knicks on Sunday. And Tim Bontemps, you saw two games this week where teams didn't crack 80 in the year AD 2024. And in the game that you saw on Sunday, neither team cracked 80 as part of a general scoring slowdown across the league. I'm not sure. I didn't see either of those games. I just saw the final scores. I'm not sure you even recognized. I mean, were you wearing vintage clothing from like 2017 or what was going on there?
Not only did a team not crack 80 in either game, a team didn't crack 75 in either game, which hadn't happened in over 3 years. And it was tonight's thrilling affair was the lowest scoring game in 8 years since a Wolves Nuggets game in January of 2016, pre-Jimmy Butler trade, I believe. At that point, Jusuf Nurkic might have still been on the Nuggets. So a lot has happened since then.
Yeah. So I don't know what to make of that. There's been a lot of discussion about slowing down of scoring. Let's just see how it goes before we freak out about it. But Tibbs was probably smiling from ear to ear until his team lost.
He was not smiling at all today. Not at any point,
No
including
kidding.
before the game when he was once again asked about OG Anunoby and could only say he's not ready to play yet.
Well, that's an accurate answer. All right. We'll talk about some of that later on. Joining us from Seattle, Washington, where he was a movie buff and we had to delay this podcast until after the Oscars ceremony wrapped. Also, Bontemps had to get back from the Garden, but I just was having fun with you. It's the machine, Kevin Pelton.
Yeah, I felt a lot better when I learned that Bontemps was actually the real reason that we're making Jackson stay up past midnight on the East Coast. It wasn't my fault.
Okay.
Well, Jackson's a young fella, and we would have made him stay up either way.
We make him stay up all the
don't worry about
time,
that.
just for fun.
That's true.
He's just back from Yankee spring training. He's all excited. So
He's very happy.
He couldn't sleep. He's counting down to opening day. So let me ask you guys a trivia question. You know the answer, but it'll be fun for me to ask it.
Oh, okay.
Who is the hottest team in the NBA as we at least record this podcast?
I know this answer solely because I saw the two hottest teams in the NBA prior lose this week. First, it was the Boston Celtics, and then it was the Orlando Magic, who were the first team to not score 75 points in 3 years. So it was the New Orleans Pelicans. Winners of 4 in a row.
Winners of 4 in a row. They are 11-4 in their last 15. You can look back at different stages of it, but I'm going to just say 15 because it's a round number. That's the second best record over the last 15 games in the league, behind the Celtics, who, had 11-game winning streak, and they had a couple losses this last week. They are number 2 in the league in defense in that stretch. Again, you can look back to different stages. They've been generally playing very good defense for the second half of the season, and that has been the story of this pretty significant turnaround. The other story is that they're healthy. I'm sure all of New Orleans is knocking on all the wood they can find because it's been the defining characteristic of this team for a couple of years now. But they are healthy, and it's showing in their results. And Pelton, one of the things about this team that I think is important to talk about as we are getting into mid-March is, one, they are the second. I think actually they are tied with Minnesota. The Timberwolves lost on Sunday night in LA. But they are tied with Minnesota now because they had a road win on Sunday themselves. They are tied with Minnesota for most road wins in the league with 21. And that defense is traveling, which I think is a big part of it. And they have morphed from one of the weaker outside shooting teams in the league to a genuine threat from the perimeter. And it has gotten them, and granted, and Bontemps has talked about this on previous shows about how the Western Conference is constantly very volatile. So we're not going to make any ironclad statements here, but it's gotten them into solidified 5th place. They're 2 games clear of the Suns as we record this for 6. As all these teams are fighting all over themselves and clawing each other trying to get to 6. The Pelicans have opened up a little bit of breathing room there. I'll talk about their schedule in a second. But Pelton, the Pelicans are kind of overlooked because you don't trust them. But it's time, I think, to start paying attention to them.
Yeah, I mean, look, you said second half of the season, second best defense. You can go all the way back to their loss to the Lakers in the play-in tournament that, obviously a lot of people were watching that night, tuning into what had been, the biggest game for the Pelicans in the Zion Williamson era, and they completely laid an egg in that one. But since that moment, they are number 2 not only in defensive rating in the league, and I didn't realize this until I looked it up, they're number 2 in net rating, period, in the NBA over that span behind the Boston Celtics, which is pretty shocking when you consider, the teams that even have better records than them over that span, like the Clippers. I think the Nuggets may still have a better record, Oklahoma City. But in terms of a per possession basis, New Orleans has outplayed them. And, look, I think there probably was some element of a wake-up call to that play-in tournament loss, particularly for Zion Williamson. And, I was listening to the Pels broadcast the other day, and Joel Myers and Antonio Daniels mentioned that, the national media only likes to talk about Zion Williamson when he's not playing well, and that it's gotten really quiet while he's going through a good stretch here. And, we see him, we acknowledge him, but the thing that's really changed, as you mentioned, is the help. And in particular, what happened right around the same time as the play-in tournament is our NBA draft night colleague on the Hoop Collective live stream, Trey Murphy III, got back into the lineup.
That's right.
And he's averaging 10 3-point attempts per 36 minutes this season, which would put him in the top 10 in the league. He's not shooting outstanding, the 10 3-point game the other night aside, by his standards, but just the threat that he poses is enormous. And he's been a huge X factor for this team. If you go to Basketball Reference and sort by the game score on his game-by-game player page, which is kind of a summary of box score performance, they are 10-0 in his 10 best games and 1-6 in his 7 worst games. So when Trey Murphy III plays well, the Pelicans are extraordinarily difficult to beat.
Well, it's not really surprising when you look at his skill set too, right? I mean, we've constantly talked about how that team needs defense and shooting around Zion, and he's, sort of a prototypical 3-and-D wing who also has the ability to maybe grow into more stuff. The bottom line is they are 8th in offense, 6th in defense, 4th in net rating. They are right there in terms of across the board production with anybody in the league. And they have been healthy for a while. They have stabilized in the middle of the West. They do with some of these, nagging injuries that the Clippers have. There is, I think, an outside chance they could maybe push up a little bit closer to them. Maybe they get to 4th in the West. But as it sits here right now, and we sort of touched on it on Thursday, I think the Pelicans are sort of the team everyone's sitting there saying, well, if we got the Pelicans, that'd be a pretty good outcome, despite all of that. Because for all of the flaws of the teams behind them, the fact of the matter is, despite the fact that he's healthy, and to Joel and Antonio's point, no one's really talking about Zion Williamson. He was healthy and wasn't close to being an all-star this year, really. And if you look at the other teams that we're talking about, with Dallas and Luka Doncic, with Phoenix, Kevin Durant and Devin Booker, with the Lakers, with LeBron and AD, with the Warriors, with Steph, you're going to be a lot more concerned about playing any of those teams in a 7-game series against one of those guys if they're healthy than you are against the Pelicans. In part because the one time we've seen him play in a game that had some sort of stakes on it in the NBA was that game in Vegas, and they got demolished isn't even a proper term for it. And they basically have disappeared ever since. So it is going to be interesting to me over this final month of the season. Anytime they get lined up against one of these other teams, I'm going to be curious to see what that matchup looks like, because they are right in the middle of all this stuff in the West and probably are going to get a pretty prime first round matchup against one of these teams. And people will go into it, I think, generally, despite their resume, saying whoever the Pelicans are playing is going to be favored to win.
Well, they're going to go through a good schedule test here in a little bit. But before I get to that, about Zion, his numbers, and before I say this, I'm not basing his season just on his stats, but just to be clear about Zion and his attention, his numbers are down pretty straight across the board. He is averaging the fewest points he has in his career. He's shooting the lowest percentage of his career, although he's still shooting 57%. He's still a beast, but he's just a little bit less efficient that way. He's averaging the fewest rebounds of his career. His steals are down. His arguably though his minutes are down too. And that's part of it. The most important stat though is he's played 52 games, and he is, I'm not assuming anything with him, but his career high played is 61, which was his second season in 2021. Now, what he has is the most assists of his career, and that is because part of the changes that they've made that has helped them is that he played point guard a little bit early in his career. It was one of Stan Van Gundy's big strategies with him, and they had some success. He's back playing quite a bit of time at point guard. And so he's not playing the same type of style of offense, and they're getting more production from the other shooters. You mentioned Pelton, Trey Murphy having a good year. Herb Jones has, Fred Vinson, who's the development, I don't know his exact title with the Pelicans, but he's their development coach. And
whatever his title is, he's shooting guru. That's what he is.
And he's got some good success stories on his resume already. I don't have it chapter and verse, but he's well respected.
Lonzo Ball, Brandon Ingram, two guys who we didn't think of as shooters when they got there from the Lakers. And, unfortunately we haven't seen it with Lonzo in a while, but became a really good 3-point shooter, and Brandon Ingram has as well.
Yeah.
And just the numbers, because I looked them up, or do you have them there?
No, go ahead.
Herb Jones, first 2 years of his career, and for people who haven't watched the Pelicans closely, he's one of the best defenders in the league. Herb Jones was a defensive player of the year at Alabama, coming in the league. The question was, can he ever develop any kind of shot? His first 2 years in the league, shot a couple threes a game, shot 33%. This year, he's up to 3.5 attempts a game. More importantly, he's 90 out of 207, which is 43.5% from three. And if that guy, let's say he goes down to 38 or 39%, if he doesn't stay at 43%, that's a absolute game-changing thing if Herb Jones is a 40-ish% three-point shooter going forward with his defensive ability.
Pelton, I think he's one of the top 3-point shooters in the league, percentage-wise, since like January 1st. I think he's almost 50% and has been, giving even better. So you've got those two things. Zion is scoring less. I think that's maybe a good thing. Also, Brandon Ingram is scoring less. He's taking fewer shots. He's playing fewer minutes, distributing the ball. I think he had double-digit assists. On Sunday, they won in Atlanta. Atlanta is really beat up right now. Obviously, Trae Young is out the rest of the season, and Jalen Johnson and Onyeka Okongwu are also out. Like, Atlanta's really just going game to game right now. A couple teams in the East, but nonetheless, it was a road win. But I think Ingram had over. Let me see how many assists he had on Sunday. I think he had a really good assist.
While you're looking that up, since January 1st, 10. Herb Jones, 29 games. The Pelicans are 18-11. He's shooting 53.5% from three, 59 for 110. And that's well north of, again, significantly over 3 attempts a game, which isn't a ton, but it's enough. And he's making them. And that's a really, really big deal.
Yeah. So anyway, Brandon Ingram down 3 points a game, down a couple of shots a game. But the Pelicans are performing well. So they're spreading around their offense more. And Ingram, like Zion, is very much a distributor. He's essentially a point forward. The ball goes into his hands a lot, and he creates a lot. He's averaging almost 6 assists a game. He's actually averaging more assists than Zion. So, when you watch their offense, CJ McCollum is a guy who can be the trigger man. Ingram, Zion, they move it around and they really defend. So they've stitched together a more dynamic offense than they've had in recent years. And they have, Willie Green really since day one has been, Willie Green came from Golden State and Phoenix. Golden State was definitely known for its defense, and Phoenix had played really good defense when he came there. It was they weren't quite at their peak. They were there was the year he came there was the year they won over 60 games, but he came there as a defensive minded coach. He certainly was a defensive minded player when he was in the league. And he has really established them as a defensive team. And when they've been healthy, they've been a good defensive team. Despite, at times there to be challenges. And I haven't watched them enough to give a fair assessment of how Zion's individual defense has been, but the numbers show that they're doing a really good job as a team defense. Now, let me talk a little bit about their schedule. They have a couple of really good tests this week. They'll test this winning streak. Wednesday, they play Cleveland. Cleveland has been without 3 starters. Got routed on their home court by the Nets on Sunday. I don't know if any of those guys are going to be back by then.
So maybe not the best test of how real they are as a team.
Well,
maybe
depends how Sam Merrill is shooting it.
That's true. But the Cavs, not only were they without Max Strus, Donovan Mitchell, and Evan Mobley, but
we're getting our default Cavs update in for everybody who's listening.
Darius Garland banged up his hand or wrist or something on Sunday night. So I don't know. By the time this pod is out, there might be an update, but we'll see. But then they also played the Clippers. The Clippers played without Paul George and Kawhi Leonard on Sunday and lost to the Bucks. So I don't know what's going to happen, but they've got a stretch later this month, and all these games are at home. They have a 6-game homestand. And my guess is at the end of this homestand, we will know a lot about where they are as a team, and they will have basically solidified probably where they're going to, or at least made clear where they're probably going to be able to be in the standings. They play the Thunder, Bucks, Celtics, Suns, and Magic all back to back. No, none of them are back to backs though. So they're staying at home. They have an off day to prepare for all of those teams. They have obviously been playing well, 11-4 in the last 15. We'll see how they fare in the short-term future with some banged-up teams potentially coming to their building. But that, Bontemps, is probably where the rubber meets the road. They do have one of the tougher schedules among the West teams, but it's not the toughest. And right there, that stretch right there will probably be a defining stretch, pending health for them.
Yeah, it'll certainly, hopefully, again, knock on wood with all the injuries we've had all over the place. Hopefully those teams are healthy and we get a real look at these guys in live competition against some elite opponents and see what they look like. And also, if they do survive that stretch pretty well, again, that could be the difference between New Orleans potentially pushing up towards that 4 seed or falling down somewhere towards that 6 to 10 group that we spent so much time talking about. Right now, going into today anyway, if you look at, from our projection system, there's about a 3-win gap on both sides at the end of the season. New Orleans is projected to be around 50 wins. Clippers are supposed to be around 53. And then Dallas and everybody else behind them is all just under 47. So they seem pretty locked in to the 5 seed. But, as we've seen with Cleveland and Philly and New York and Milwaukee and all these other various teams lately, you have some injuries or something goes haywire and you lose 4 or 5 in a row you don't expect to, all of a sudden those things could change rapidly and they could be right back in the mix of those teams behind them, or like I said, potentially up with the Clippers. So they are one of the teams I'm really curious to watch over the next few weeks and see how they look. Cause again, if you're just lining it up and you're the Thunder or the Nuggets or one of these teams at the top of the conference, you're saying, hey, if you could pick your opponent from the back half of the West, who would you want to play? I think, maybe it'd be Sacramento, but I think either Sacramento or New Orleans would be the first and or second picks off the board. And, maybe that'll end up being proven incorrect, but it's an interesting opportunity for them to prove themselves when, as Kevin pointed out, the most relevant game of the entire Zion era, especially for Zion himself, is that dud in the in-season tournament.
One thing to point out about the Pelicans as sort of their mid-range future here, they have 2 significant things they got to deal with in the offseason. Brandon Ingram has 1 year left on his contract. He is eligible for an extension. He would be eligible for the Supermax if he made All NBA. I don't think that's going to be happening, but
We're gonna need a lot more injuries for him to make All NBA.
Yeah.
That is an interesting point though, because Brandon Ingram, usually people think of you can't be traded and get the Supermax, but because that trade happened while he was still on his rookie contract, he is eligible.
Right. I talk with this a lot about when I do my appearances in Cleveland. The difference between Donovan Mitchell and Brandon Ingram is that Brandon Ingram was traded during his rookie contract, the first 4 years of his career, where Donovan was traded while he was into his second contract, his max contract. So
by the way, if Donovan sits out on Monday against Phoenix, which it seems like he's going to, he will officially not be eligible to make All NBA this season.
Right. But it's not relevant in terms of his contract. We mentioned this on the pod again.
Just
but
pointing it out because we've talked about it a bunch.
Ingram and Donovan are on the same contract schedule. They both have one guaranteed year left on their contract and can extend this summer. So they have to handle that. Also, Trey Murphy is a restricted free agent this summer.
No, he's extension eligible.
I'm sorry. Take that back. You were correct. Extension eligible. They're going to want to get him signed. And that is going to probably cost a lot of money.
And remember, the Pelicans have never paid the tax, got out of the tax this year. And the Brandon Ingram thing is interesting because if they can't get an extension done, small market team with him 1 year away from free agency, that becomes a very interesting situation to monitor if they can't get something done with him.
Again, this is a classic stress max situation because with where the max contract is, I'm sure he's going to want the max, but he has made one all-star team in his career. He's a very, very good player, but with what they owe Zion coming up, and by the way, as Zion keeps staying healthy, his contract's going to, there was some headlines a few months ago about how because he only played 29 games last year, there's clauses in his contract that, sort of de-guarantee, later years in his career. That's true, but it's just temporary. He can earn those guarantees back. And so I think the number is 60 games or something like that. Whatever it is, he could still allow for him to re-guarantee his contract basically. And the same goes for next year. He gets, if he has another injury-riddled season, it becomes de-guaranteed again. It's one of the more unique contracts we've ever seen in the NBA. But he's on their books. CJ McCollum is on their books for significant money. And if they sign Ingram and sign Trey Murphy, it's going to get tight.
Well, there's one more decision too, which is Jonas Valanciunas is a free agent this summer.
Valanciunas is a free agent, and they definitely explored as much as they could what his value in the marketplace was at the trade deadline to see if they could get a center who maybe was under contract, under control for a little bit more. So, the question is whether they're going to pay. And, I'm not saying that I think the Pelicans will never pay the tax, but I don't know if they're paying the tax for a team that's 5th or 6th place in the conference. So
like they do, like in the playoffs in terms of proving themselves as a playoff team, they're also Gail Benson is going to have to prove willing to pay the tax before I'm going to believe they're going to ever pay it.
Yeah. And, the other team, there's only two teams that have never paid the tax. That's the Charlotte Hornets and the New Orleans Pelicans, which is ironic because the Pelicans, previously were in Charlotte.
Well, in Denver, by the way, if you want to argue the other side of it, now Stan Kroenke's always had the money to pay, but they always were famous for not paying the tax or getting out of the tax when they could, or doing a cheaper option when they could. Now they've got a championship caliber team that could maybe be a potential dynastic team, and they're paying a lot of tax money. So,
but Denver had paid taxes.
Yes.
Before. A luxury tax.
Well, my point is that was always a point of skepticism around the Nuggets long term, was if they had a team like this, would they be willing to pay this kind of money? And they are.
Fair statement. But anyway, that's one thing, look, I don't want to focus only on that, but that's one of our jobs is to evaluate this team and where they're at going forward. And that's one of the things that we look at. But we'll be keeping an eye on the Pelicans going forward. Okay, so on Sunday night, the Minnesota Timberwolves fell to the Lakers in LA they got a strange road trip that started in Indiana and then went to Cleveland and then went to the West Coast. You don't don't see many Western Conference teams go on a road trip to Cleveland and then LA. But
with
we
the time change in between.
no kidding. Well, the team that had arguably the most ridiculous schedule over the weekend, although they didn't have to travel, the Clippers played back-to-back day games on Saturday and Sunday, and on Sunday
with daylight savings in the middle.
Daylight savings time, which this is one of the things, like, not sure I should quote Steve Ballmer, but let's just say it's
why they're moving to a new arena where they're not going to be the third tenant.
Yeah, to quote Dollar Bill, I am not uncertain as that the schedule, one of the biggest irritations was how they got short shrift on the schedule, and this is example 846 this weekend. But anyway,
right, the Lakers played 2 night games, Friday and Sunday, and the Clippers played a day game on Saturday and a day game on Sunday. It's the most blatant example possible.
It's toilets number 1 and then schedule number 2.
Right. It's toilets, then schedule.
Toilet bowl, baby.
I will say this, like, if you've flown into LAX at all recently, and you can see the Intuit Dome. I haven't had a chance to be inside yet. It doesn't look like any other arena. It is, generally arenas, for the most part, they kind of sort of feel the same, with mild differences. This arena looks totally different. This is going to be an interesting experience. I am going to miss the convenience, though, of being able to go to Crypto for all those games. All right, forget about that. Yeah, Crypto on Sunday night with the Timberwolves. And the Timberwolves are one of the teams in the NBA that's dealing with a lot of adversity right now. So Karl Towns was sitting on the bench. I don't know this for a fact, but I suspect that it means that he's going to have his meniscus surgery in Los Angeles early in the week. But they had Rudy Gobert, who was out with a hamstring injury. So they had $400 some odd million in players sitting on the bench for this game against the Lakers. Kyle Anderson, who has been the fill-in starter for Karl Towns, he was also out, I think, with a shoulder injury. They were playing in their rotation TJ Warren, who's on a 10-day contract, and Luke Garza, who's I believe on a 2-way contract. We're getting rotation minutes in this game, and Jordan McLaughlin, who's third string, basically. And yet it was basically, I think it was a tie game or a 1-point game going to the fourth quarter. But
they had a lead start of the fourth quarter.
Were they ahead? Were they ahead?
Yeah, by a point.
The Lakers blitzed them in the fourth. Anyway, Bontemps, before we came on, you were talking about something about the Lakers in this game, the result of this game with their record.
Yeah, I saw a tweet from Jovan Buha from The Athletic that there was the Lakers are now 6 games over 500, which they have not been since the end of the 2020-21 regular season when they were 42-30. They are now 36-30 this season.
Yeah, and in ninth place.
And in ninth place.
And in ninth place with help from Steph Curry getting injured, quite frankly. But the Timberwolves are going to struggle here for a little bit. They've now fallen all the way back to third. It's very tight in the West, obviously, but they've now fallen back to third. They've got this 6-game road trip that they're 1-2 on, and the one came with Edwards making a jaw-dropping play in Indiana last week. But I got to say, before we have a discussion about Timberwolves or Lakers, Rudy Gobert is a friend of this podcast. He has always been very accommodating to the media.
This is a well-known, very pro Rudy podcast from a personal standpoint.
Yes. Terrific guy. He and McMahon go way back. But Rudy really hurt his team on Friday night in Cleveland, where he got a technical foul in a 1-point game late in the fourth quarter. The Cavs were wheezing, again, down 3 starters. And that not only, it was more than that, because he committed his 6th foul on the play on a loose ball foul, which absolutely was a foul. I didn't even look at the last 2-minute report, but I have to assume that was.
He did a swim move on Jared Allen.
Yeah.
It was an obvious foul.
So he commits his 6th foul in a situation that it's a loose ball foul, so it's a shooting foul. So he gives 2 shots in a 1-point game and then gets teed up because he does the money sign at Scott Foster. And vital point. I mean, the game goes to overtime less than a minute later, or minute and a half later, or something like that. Secondly, after the game, he then doubles down, basically, saying,
Interesting turn of phrase there.
Yes. Basically, he didn't say that Scott Foster is a cheater, but he basically said that. He goes, I know what the truth is. And this is at least the third or fourth time he's been fined for talking about the officials having it in for his team. He was decided that they had it in for him when he was in Utah. Now he's decided they have him in for him in Minnesota. I will tell you, as somebody from Cleveland, it is the first time anyone's ever insinuated that the Cavs were being. Well, that's not true. When LeBron was around, I'm sure there were people who thought that he got a friendly whistle.
I believe Aisha Curry very famously during the 2016 finals.
That is correct. That is correct.
I take it all back, Pelton. Yes, it was done for ratings or money. Sorry, was what she said. So you're correct. The Cavs, by the way, did get a friendly whistle in that game, without question. But this particular call was a foul. And it was a rough call. And Ant was exhausted from the night before playing in Indiana, scoring 44. I don't think he scored. He might have gotten a free throw. I don't think he made a basket in the fourth quarter in overtime. Ant was gassed, and not having Rudy killed them in overtime. And the Cavs won that game. And the thing that's sort of unsaid here, this Tim Donaghy documentary that Netflix did. I think it came out last off season.
Yeah,
obviously
a year or two ago.
Okay. Obviously,
whenever, recently.
Yeah.
Recently.
Look, I'm not going to re-adjudicate Tim Donaghy. I don't find him credible. A lot of people don't find him credible. The problem is a lot of NBA players saw it. You remember when LeBron tweeted that he saw it and was tweeted about it. I'm not relitigating that, but I will tell you that it is something that players have an issue with, and as if they need another reason to be frustrated with Scott Foster.
Right.
And Gobert stepped across the line, and he got hit for $100,000 because of his past history and because he was implying that. And it's obviously, if the Timberwolves miss, a top 2 or 3 seed because of one game, there'll be 15 different reasons, but that was a bad one, Bontemps. That was a bad one. Rudy, unforced error from Rudy.
Well, look, Rudy looks like a bozo. I really enjoy Rudy personally. He's a fantastic player. He's a Hall of Fame player. He also, as you said, has done this multiple times in the past. It's why he got hit with this giant fine. He frankly deserved to get hit with a giant fine. But on the other hand, this is the bed the league has made for itself by getting in bed with the gambling companies, because
he did reference that as well.
Well, and listen, the NBA for years pretended, like the NFL, right? Gambling is terrible. We don't want to talk about it. We don't want to be associated with it. And now that there's this very significant revenue stream coming in, what is it? There's gambling stuff left and right. The NBA's grabbing, gimme. They're having the in-season tournament in Vegas. Whenever they do expansion, there will certainly be a team in Vegas. And it's all an outgrowth of the gambling money pouring into the sport.
They got casinos inside arenas now.
Right. The Adelsons just bought the Adelson family just bought the Mavs from Mark Cuban.
There's a sports book inside the Capital One Arena in DC.
Right. And there's
one inside Footprint Center in Phoenix.
That's
there might be more.
And part of the push to buy the team by the Dumont/Adelsons is to get gambling legal in Texas, which will be a giant cash register for them. I think there's plans to build a giant complex there with a stadium inside a casino or vice versa. But if you're going to get in bed with the gambling companies, this is going to be the other side of it, where if you're Rudy Gobert and you make these comments and you get hit with $100,000 fine, and Draymond Green tried to choke him out in a sleeper hold and got a $25,000 fine, people are going to go, oh, look, Adam Silver cares more about some comments about the refs than he does about basically anything else.
Well, you got to find more than that because he got suspended, just to be clear.
Well,
I know what
I'm just saying, like, the point is, This is the situation the NBA has created for itself by just grabbing the money. And by grabbing the money, they can't say, well, we're not associated with gambling. Well, your whole league is now associated with gambling all the way
let me ask you
to
this.
the end.
What is the conspiracy theory there? Is the conspiracy theory from the player's perspective, and I should be asking a player, so I'm sorry I'm asking you. Is the conspiracy theory that because the league is involved in gambling, that it is somehow giving a message to its referees how to officiate games to help the gambling partners? Is that the line that they're referencing? Because I'm not sure like how having gambling sponsorships affects how the referees would call the game. I mean, if you think that a referee is betting on a game, which is what happened with Donaghy, why would the NBA's association with gambling matter? I think it's like what you said, I think is accurate, Bontemps, but I don't think it makes sense.
Well, this is based in a conspiracy theory to begin with, so I don't necessarily believe it to be true. I'm just saying it's hard for the NBA to act holier than thou about gambling comments when it's taking money hand over fist from gambling companies. That's what the point I was making.
I mean, we might be giving the logic here a little bit too much credit. People have been frustrated and saying the referees have been paid off for as long as basketball has existed.
Right.
And, this is just a new thing to complain about. I will say for anyone who's interested in the Tim Donaghy thing, he is not a credible witness about his own life whatsoever. I would suggest looking up what Bob Bulgaris, friend of the pod, talked about back in the day when this broke, because he broke it down as someone who understands gambling and on basketball in a way that certainly none of us do.
Better than anybody ever, probably.
And NBA players do. Definitely the NBA did things wrong and swept this under the rug to try to minimize the scandal. But I don't think like the claims that Tim Donaghy makes should be taken seriously.
I agree. But unfortunately, the players who are already convinced that they're getting screwed in one way or another. Years ago, I had this the layers at which people watch games, like sort of the surface level fan who's, he or she knows the players on the team. He comes to the game, just sort of just watching the ball, having a good time on a Friday night. Then there's the educated fan who knows all the rules, knows the contracts, knows what the gather is, maybe even, on a travel. And, that probably those are a lot of the people that are listening to this podcast. We talk about the Timberwolves after midnight on Sunday night. Then you have, I think, the sort of professional level, which is expansive. Media, players, and people associated with the game. What's
the level beyond that? I'm curious what the next level is.
There's one more level. Who, do this every day, know all the referees, know the referees' tendencies, know how certain things go, understand the histories between certain players and referees, etc. And then there's the fourth layer, which is the layer of the paranoia layer, which I guess some players fall into when you are like an executive or an owner who is convinced that everything is out to get you, and you have chapter and verse. You may even have had your intern produce 75 clips, and you've had your assistant general manager, director of basketball strategy, create a 665 frame PowerPoint.
This has happened. I was going to say this is what they do about Kevin Pelton and his draft and free agency and trade grades, which you might think I'm kidding about. I can promise you I am not.
Right. Well, the old, we sent it to the league, that sort of layer where, and that is the layer at which, things start to get crazy, where there's it's so ingrained that they're being, that they're being screwed, that there's really no talking them out of it. I think players, some of them have a different, different feelings. You talk about it, but the level at which front offices and even all the way up to ownership sort of go into this. I mean, can you imagine what Mark Cuban, you remember the Daryl Morey, maybe that where they were leaking a report that was over calls that were like 2 years prior. That's what I'm talking about.
It came up during the panel he did at the Sloan conference last week with our old friend Jackie McMullen. So that one still lives.
Is he still defiant about it? Like he's still like 7 years ago, we got 3 bad calls in the third quarter of game 6.
Knowing Daryl, his position has not slackened in the intervening years.
It is not, but I believe the specific point was Jackie mentioned missing 27 consecutive threes in the game, and he was like, well, we got fouled on 2 of those. So It was actually 25.
Correct. That's right. Yeah. Jackson says this is same level that everybody's going down with the Kate Middleton altered photos, which my wife
we're bringing in the Royals. We're really having a crossover pod today.
Yes, we were trying to bring
Royals,
in a bigger audience.
Everything. Oscars, Royals, Pelicans.
Listen, when we're on ESPN2, we're trying to bring in a bigger audience. And my wife was going through her own forensic analysis of that tonight. So I'm a little behind on that. I'll have to catch up with the British tabloids tomorrow. But anyway, Gobert hurt the Wolves, and the Wolves are in a tough spot right now. Pelton. Hopefully Gobert and Anderson will be back soon. The Wolves are having their best season in 20 years. This threatens really to derail them because I don't think Karl Towns will be back at all during the regular season. Do you anticipate that they can keep their head above water? I mean, I was watching the Lakers in the fourth quarter. They were just flat out double teaming Ant Edwards. And I just think that's going to be the rule of the day going forward.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's going to be hard for them to stay in the top 2 for sure. I mean, Denver was kind of already coming on, as has been talked about on this podcast. Oklahoma City currently has the best projection using BPI, as Tim referenced earlier, right now. And this was even going into tonight's games. Minnesota was a pretty clear third. This drops them back. I mean, the Clippers also a loss today, so I guess the 2 of those move back in tandem. It's an outside possibility. I think they could fall down all the way to 4th in the Western Conference, which, if Denver's in 2 might not be the worst outcome in the world. I guess I might want to be on the other side of the bracket from the Nuggets.
Well, I'll tell you, just real quick, because we talked about the Lakers a little bit, and we've talked a lot on the pod about how the Lakers are a team that is dangerous in very specific matchups. If I'm a Laker fan and I'm at home, and the Laker fans really don't like me, so be prepared for me to say something that you might want to actually hear for once. You want to be rooting hard for the Thunder to win, and I think you could even make a potential argument.
The 1 seed, you mean?
Well, to win every game, because if the Thunder end up with the number 1 seed in the West, you could have a world where the Lakers, who are, as we've talked about, very, very likely to be in the 9-10, which means if they get in the playoffs at all, which is no certainty, they're going to be the 8 seed. So if you're the Lakers and you can find a way to get in as the 8 seed, what you don't want to be looking at is a second straight sweep, because that's probably what's happening if you're playing the defending champs. But if the Thunder are in the 1 spot, especially as Kevin pointed out, with Minnesota falling back, probably means Denver is in the 2-3 spot, either a 2nd or 3rd, probably 2nd. That means you don't have to worry about Denver till the conference finals. It also means you're on the side of the bracket with a Thunder team that they've won 3 games against this year that is very small. That, as we saw today, AD, when he plays smaller teams, is a giant load inside.
Yeah, he had a 20-20
huge guy to deal with.
7
He had a 25-25 game.
Oh, right.
And then you've got the Pelicans, who they've had the number of in that 4-5 matchup, potentially against a Wolves team that, or either the Clippers or the Lakers have played well against this year, or a Wolves team that may or may not have Karl Towns. So again, not saying the Lakers are making the conference finals by any stretch, but there is the potential where if they can find a way to get in, they could have a similar draw to last year that, at least on paper, squares up with that specific team's skill strength or strengths and could allow them potentially to make a run.
The Lakers, do have success when they've played quote unquote big. It took a lot to get Darvin Ham there, but playing with Hachimura, LeBron, and AD has borne fruit and gotten to 6 games over 500.
Well, it's just whenever as we've talked about so much, it's just whenever they can play teams that LeBron and AD can bully. If they can bully guys and bully teams and get to the line and make it a slugfest, those two guys can control the game. And all those teams present the ability for them to potentially do that.
Well, they are facing a team in their next game on Wednesday in Sacramento that has bullied them for 2 years. Domantas Sabonis has owned Anthony Davis, 9-0 against him in his career. I think they're 1-7 against them the last 8 times they played.
Might not be on the other. Conversely, might not be the best opponent to have to see in a potential one-off game in the playoffs.
Would agree, and right now that's a team that's in front of them, and I don't think they can catch them. But if they have any dream of catching them, they better win that game to get a sort of a double credit. So speaking of teams that are beat up, the Warriors aren't as beat up as some of the teams that are fighting for position with them, but losing Steph Curry, even if it's not for an extended period of time, has taken a toll. And Pelton, as we do this pod, they have slipped down to a 10th place in the Western Conference. They are tied with the Lakers in the loss column, but they have 3 fewer wins because they had some games postponed earlier when their assistant coach Decky passed away, and they're just a little bit behind. And so that's fine. I mean, in theory, they can catch up, but the problem is that, they're 3 games over 500. So, and then you got to play games, in a tightened window. Back-to-backs are created where there weren't back-to-backs. The outlook for the Warriors, which was looking pretty rosy 7 to 10 days ago, has eroded. They actually, I think, had gotten into 8 briefly, didn't they?
That sounds right. Yeah.
But Dallas is now, Dallas has recovered a little bit. So anyway, the Steph Curry factor is looming pretty large in that West seeding right now.
Yeah, I mean, Tim was mentioning the importance of being out of that 9-10 playoff game. And, the Lakers actually are less than 50-50 coming in today in the BPI projections to be part of that game. The Warriors coming into today, 77%, far and away the most of any Western Conference team. And,
that's what happens when you lose games to the Bulls and the Spurs at home.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's what I was going to say is you lost to you said the Spurs at home, you buried the lead. It was the Spurs at home without Victor Wembanyama. So that's one of the worst losses of the season. And, obviously they badly missed Steph Curry in that game. They play in San Antonio on Monday night. Then Dallas, another game that's kind of crucial. Dallas and the Lakers are the next 2 games. So a couple of teams they need to beat if they have any chance of climbing out of 9-10 and getting up into that 7-8 play-in game. And
Victor, by the way, is scheduled to play on Monday.
Yep. Mm-hmm. He'll be back. We'll see if Steph can make it back for that Lakers game on Saturday night on ABC, but seems, he won't be reevaluated until Tuesday. So certainly out for that Dallas game. And they just do not have a lot of margin for error. So even though the news on Steph Curry was relatively good in terms of him not being sidelined for long, that still could be the difference between them getting up to 7 or 8 and being stuck in 9 or 10 and most likely 10, which would mean having to win twice on the road to make it to the playoffs.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, they're dangerous and we respect them, but again, they're 3 games over 500.
I want to make one point about that. Can we really call a team that at home against a Spurs team without Victor Wembanyama cannot win with Steph Curry a dangerous team? I think we might want to retire the idea that they're dangerous.
You're not necessarily wrong, but I'm just going to say that we're living in a world where we saw 2 play-in teams make the conference finals last year. So I think
we saw one super fluky thing happen, but I think I think we need to see some evidence that this team is really a team to be that concerned about. There are a couple games over 500. They just lost. Yes, they played amazingly against the Bucks. They then turned around and lost a home game to the Bulls, who have played better but are still a below 500 team. And then even beyond that, you want to write off the Bulls game. They then got pounded at home by a horrific Spurs team.
Yeah. What I've been saying is, this isn't just something to say, I believe it, is that I believe that the Warriors are not really a fair assessment of their record, because the way that they've been playing isn't indicative of the way that they got to that record, because Draymond was suspended. It took, they put Clay on the bench. They started to play their young guys, Kuminga, Pajemski, and Jackson Davis, and that things were looking their outlook. I was comparing it to last year, where the Lakers were walking around with a record under 500 at this point, but they had actually become one of the best defensive teams in the league after the trade deadline, and that they were actually more deadly. But the point that you're making here is that even if that's true, even if you agree with my premise, and you may reject it, I'm not going to be offended. The deck that is so stacked against them, the margin for error is so small that it might not matter that they're actually a much better team than 3 games over 500 would suggest.
Yeah, I mean, Miami did go to the second play-in game, need that last year, and ended up making the playoffs, and did it as the 8th seed to get all the way to the NBA Finals. But they still were
benefited from a
7th
Giannis
coming
injury.
in.
Nobody says that ever, and I'm guilty of that too. But if Giannis is 100% healthy, I don't know if the series goes the same way. The Heat believe it. The Heat have had great success against the Bucks. The Knicks were
also banged up in the second round too. I think they'd have beat the Knicks either way, but Julius Randle was messed up. Jalen Brunson was messed up. I mean, I think Miami was a better team, but still.
Yeah, I mean, the big thing though is, like, those are teams that would have been in the playoffs either way. What we have not seen is a team that has gone from outside the top 8 via the play-in make any real noise in the playoffs as yet.
That's true. And we spend a lot of time talking about 2 of them, but I kind of get it. I'm sorry. I kind of get it. So we spent a lot of time the other day talking about how the Bucks were, a team to be paying more attention to. Their defense had improved. And Bontemps said, talk to me after this road trip, which was fair. And they did get a win on Sunday against the Clippers, who played without Paul George and Kawhi Leonard on the second straight afternoon game on daylight savings. But whatever, the Bucks won that game. However,
they escaped with pulling it away in the fourth quarter in that game.
Yeah, but it didn't. The road trip hasn't started out great, and the Bucks still, their numbers are still much improved defensively, but it's been a little bit sobering for the Bucks, Bontemps.
It didn't look that great defensively when they gave up $125 to the Warriors on Wednesday and lost by 35, making Golden State the first team to ever lose by 50 and then win by 30 plus in their next game. Nor did it look too great on Friday night when they gave up $123 to the Lakers without LeBron and had D'Angelo Russell go for 45 and 9 and completely tear apart Damian Lillard down the stretch of that
44.
game. So,
McMahon needs to know
44 and 9.
If Patrick Beverley had been out there on the final possession, it would have been totally different.
Would have made all the difference in the world. All the difference. I mean, look, like you said, whatever else you want to say about the Bucks, and again, I'm still skeptical that they've solved everything, though they're obviously better in some respects than they were before the coaching change. Frankly, the fact of the matter is, with where the East is right now, no matter how disorganized the Bucks remain, they are the 2 seed by default, because everyone else from the Cavs on down has seeded the race largely through injury, and the Bucks are sort of the last team standing.
Well, the Cavs are only a half game back, and none of their injuries should be season ending. But
their guys are out for a while. Evan Mobley's out for a while.
They're also just not playing great.
Yes.
They don't look like a second place team.
They got smoked by the Brooklyn Nets on Sunday, a team that has basically only beat the Atlanta Hawks in recent weeks. So, and the corpse of the Sixers last week.
I mean, even the Heat
didn't play.
The Heat, who again looked like they were sticking their foot in the ground and saying, "Okay, here we come," just spiked 3 games in a row, including losing to the Wizards, who
no longer the Lizards. The Wizards.
The Lizards, as McMahon had been calling them, literally for
weeks. 2 in a row.
I know, 2 in a row. Second straight
3. They call that a winning streak.
It's amazing.
Yeah, I mean the Wizards, by the way, getting a win and then defying the Miami flu after a Saturday night in Miami in March, which having lived in Miami for several years, things get a little wild on Saturdays in March in that city. They
Only Saturdays in March. What about Saturdays in
particular. How
January,
about this?
February,
How
April?
about particularly Saturday in March? What I really want to know is if the Techno Music Festival is going on there right now. If it's, I think we're a little early for that. If it's going on there right now and the road team won, then you really have overachieved there. But yeah, so the Heat have dramatically cooled off after looking like they had things put together. I mean, I'm trying to make a case. The Knicks didn't crack 80. Pelton looked it up. Remind me what it's called, Pelton. I always made sure I was out of town.
Ultra Music Festival. So that's March 22nd to 24th.
Yes. Ultra.
All I'm going to say about Ultra, the building that I lived in Miami was also a hotel. It was like a 50-story tower, and the bottom, like 20 stories, were a hotel. Okay. And if you lived in the building, you came in sort of through the same lobby. During Ultra, the hotel lobby after midnight, because the Heat always are playing at home and I would come back from the games, could have had an NC-17 rating. That's all I'm going to say. And I remember the last time I was in Miami during Ultra, I was I got a taxi outside the American Airlines Arena, and I was taking like a red eye out of there, and I was like 1 a.m, and I come out on Biscayne Boulevard, and I was like, I don't even know if I'm gonna be able to get a taxi, and I hailed this taxi, and he rolled down the window and said, "Where are you going?" I said, "The airport." He looked in the back seat, which was covered in plastic, grabbed the tarp, pulled it off, and goes, "Get in." I jumped in the taxi, and he's like, "This is my last fare. I'm getting out." I think he wanted to get on the plane with me. All right. Anyway, it's hard to win on Sundays in Miami for the visiting team, especially when you've just come off a 16-game losing streak. The Heat lost. Orlando has even cooled off. They've lost 2 in a row after being the hottest team. New York didn't break 80. The Cavs injury report is getting longer by the hour. Guess Boston's not feeling so bad about itself, Bontemps.
Well, no, and you even mentioned the Sixers, who are still without Joel Embiid and have missed Tyrese Maxey for the last week now. Saw Tyrese after the game. I think there's a decent chance he'll be out of concussion protocol and playing Tuesday in the second game of this baseball series against the Knicks. But
by the way, Ben Matherin on the Pacers, one of the best subs in the
torn
league.
labrum.
He's out for the year.
Yeah, I mean, it's really crazy. It felt like for so much of the year, it was like, man, we haven't really had any injuries, knock on wood. Like, competition's been great. Seeing all this awesome stuff going on over the last month really feels like starting with when Joel had that unfortunate play at the end of January against the Warriors. It's just been a cascade of injuries across the league. And
can I give you a stat on that?
There we go. We got Pelton stats. Let's go.
So obviously this is biased by the fact that players are not going to get selected for the All-Star game if they've missed too much of the first half of the season. But if you look at this year's All-Stars, up until Valentine's Day, there hadn't been more than 4 All-Stars missing games on the same day. Now, 4 times since then, we've had at least 5. And last Tuesday, 8 All-Stars missed games on the same day.
From this year's All-Star game, you mean?
Yeah, and I don't even have stats on Sunday when Kawhi and PG were both out, as we talked about.
Yeah, there were. I was at a game where 3 All-Stars did not play from this year's All-Star game in the same game, and that doesn't count the 2 guys in LA. So there's at minimum 5 just from those 2 games today, let alone, and Donovan Mitchell didn't play, so that's 6. So right there, we just thought of 6 guys. So it has been crazy to see how
Rudy Gobert should have been an All-Star.
He should have been. Well, and
Carl
another
Towns
one. So there's 7.
Oh, Carl, right.
It is just crazy how injuries have become, very sadly, such a defining part of the league over the past few weeks, to your point, Kevin. And a lot of what's going to happen, I think, over the next few weeks in the East is really just going to be which of these teams can get their guys on the court. Like if Joel Embiid can get out there sometime by the end of the month, maybe that's enough for Philly to find a way to stay in the top 6. Maybe they can even get to 4 somehow. If Donovan Mitchell is able to get back sometime soon from this PRP injection and the bone bruise in his knee and his quad, like they might be able to stay in the top 3. The Knicks been waiting, OG Anunoby might be back soon. They've been playing without their entire starting front court for a month. All 3 of those guys could be back sometime in the next few weeks. How this largely plays out might just come down to that, because as of Sunday night, after all the games are played, you've got a 1-loss spread from 5th place to 8th place, and you got a 2-loss spread from 4th place to 8th place. So it's, we've talked a ton about the West, understandably, but this Eastern race, it's all jammed up, and a lot of it very well could just come down to who can manage to get their guys on the court over the next month.
I wish it wasn't the case, but it is the case. Yet again, a season that's being heavily defined by injuries, despite everything that's being done to try to mitigate it. By the way, before we go, Corey Kispert from the Wizards should be a good who he played for some people. He had 23 points today. Here's a little free tip. I play NBA 2K, whatever, 24, 25 with my son. He makes me take the Wizards because he wants to win. Kispert is unstoppable in that freaking game. I've had multiple 40-point games with Corey Kispert because the dude does not miss an open shot. He's like, I almost think that Kispert has like a buddy that he went to Gonzaga with or something, who's now like a coder for 2K, who like secretly put in a code that he's like the most unstoppable player in the game. I'm telling you, if you said to me in that game, I could have Steph Curry or Kispert, I wouldn't even think about it for a second. And my son thinks that Kispert's like unstoppable because I just destroy him with him. I mean, I let him win, obviously, but I destroy him with Corey Kispert. So
I didn't think
I don't know if
Corey Kispert 2K breakdown.
Yeah, I actually have been to 2 Wizards games in the last month. I could have had the opportunity to go and actually Jackson said that Steve Novak was a legend in 2K12. So, this Bear is investigating, like Rudy Gobert made an accusation. I'm making an accusation that there's shenanigans with Corey Kispert's 3-point shooting accuracy in NBA 2K. That's all I'm going to say. I know that Ronnie 2K, he's all about what the rankings are. I don't even know where he is, but I'm telling you, offensively, this dude is a 99 in that game. No lies.
I suspect he's not.
I know he's not. And I had to turn off auto substitutions because they were like subbing the dude out of the game in the 4th quarter. I was like, no, you cannot take that guy off the court. He's got to be on the floor. I have no chance to stay in the game. All right. Thank you for watching the Hoop Collective podcast. Thank you for checking it out with us, audio and video here on ESPN2. Thank you to Jackson, our producer. Thank you to Pelton. Thank you to Bontemps. Thank you, everybody listening, and we'll talk to you later this week.